it home
Yes.
for the holidays here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yes.
We haven't been here quite some time, so it's really nice to come here for Thanksgiving.
Well, you know, we're all very glad and fortunate to have you all here with family, because it's something that you can't always do. And it's beautiful the way this family has stayed together and fellowships together for holidays like this.
Yes, you're right. It's just good to be with the family on Thanksgiving.
Yes, it is. Grandmother. Grandma?
Hell no, I don't know. No, not right now.
What about the holidays, grandmother dear? And how you feel about having your brother and sister-in-law make it here? Huh?
I don't know how to talk on that.
Well, you know, you just talk to me like you talk, period. You glad to have them here visiting for the holidays?
I'm glad to have my brother and my sister-in-law with me. That's the only brother I have right now.
Oh, yes?
We all try to stick together. I'm just happy that I'm living to see another Thanksgiving, to enjoy it.
Well, we're very thankful to have you here, too. How long you been doing these family meals?
About 40 years.
40 years? Whoa. About how many people do you serve every year?
You know, it's 40 and 50.
And what kind of meal do you prepare?
Well, I have ham, I have turkey, I have chitlins, I have greens, I have green beans, I have macaroni and cheese, I have sweet potatoes, I have potato salad, I have slaw, I have rolls, and dessert.
Goodness, and you're making me hungry already. I look forward to having all this good food tomorrow. And let's see, we've got another family member over here on the side. Aunt Ruby, how are you doing today?
Fine. It's so good to be home with the family.
Yes, and we're delighted to have you
I
here.
was so happy when you walked in the door because I hadn't seen you in a long time.
Yes.
So, it's just great.
Well, I'm glad to see you too, and you know me. I think about folks, but you might not always see me because I'm the person who's always running. No, they call Aunt Mattie the road runner, but I guess I must be road runner number 2, huh?
And you are, which is great. Keep it up.
Well, I'm glad to see you all here. I want to get a
Thankful to be here.
little family background and history here while I've got a chance, you know, and got the 3 of you here together. Got quite a bit of history assembled just between you 3 folks, and particularly Uncle Frank. I want to get this recorded because I know at some time we sat down and we talked some about your career as far as you being a salesperson with autos, but the fact that how you made the movement from Kentucky on into Detroit and your military background. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and tell me some of this story so I can get this recorded?
Okay. I went in service in 1943. I went overseas to Italy.
Grandmother, can you turn the TV down a little bit, please?
I spent about 3.5 years in Italy, and I came back. I came back from the Army, and I had some friends in the Army with me that lived in Lansing, Michigan. So I left Cincinnati and went to Michigan to visit my friends whom I was in service with. And then that's where I met my wife Ruby in Lansing, and we got married and went to Detroit, Michigan. And we lived there. And in the meantime, I had planned to go to school for a mortician in a funeral home. In the meantime, I changed my mind and decided that I would take up flying. So I went to school for flying and got my license. And I used to take my wife, we'd go flying.
And at that time, as far as an African-American flying, was that something that was popular, or was that like a pioneering adventure for you?
It was a pioneering adventure because you didn't find that many blacks at that time who were flying. And a lot of times you would notice when you would stop at some airport to gas up your plane, you would find that people were looking and, you know, they just didn't seem to realize what was happening to see blacks flying. Then after that, I had gotten a job with Buick, and at first I was just more or less like a maintenance man on the used car lot. And so finally one day I decided that I would like to get into sales. So I walked into the general manager's office and I asked about a job as salesman, and he looked at me kind of funny and he said, well, he said, it's not the right time. He said, it might be a time when you can do this, but right now it's not the right time. So I said, okay. So I walked on out, and it went on for about 2 or 3 weeks from that, and I decided, well, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to find a job selling someplace. So I told him I was leaving in 2 weeks. I gave him a 2 weeks notice. But they thought that I was kidding, you know, they didn't think I was going to do it. So in 2 weeks, the day before, I went in the office and I told him, I said, well, tomorrow's my last day. And the man I was working for on the used car lot, he said, what do you mean tomorrow's your last day? I said, well, I gave you a notice 2 weeks ago and I told you that I was leaving. Well, he thought I was kidding. So I left. And I went right on from there, and I went to the first used car lot I stopped at and applied for a job. They hired me. So I worked for them just a very short while. And then I went to work for a Buick dealer. And I worked for this Buick dealer for about 10 years, and they sold out, and I went to another Buick dealer. And I worked for them for about 7 years. And then a Cadillac dealer, I met a Cadillac dealer in a restaurant one day. I was talking to him, and he wanted me to go to work for him. So I decided I would go to work for this Buick dealer. I mean, this Cadillac dealer, I'm sorry. So I give them a notice that I was leaving. And I went on to this Cadillac dealer and he told me to come on down and just put in an application, but he told me, he said, don't just come right to work. He said, take off for at least a week, because they had an association. If a dealer liked you and you went to another dealer, they could file a complaint against them and they'd have to let you go, you know.
Okay, it wasn't union, but that's just the way the trade worked.
That's just the way they worked. So anyway, I went on to this Cadillac dealer, and my wife and I, we decided that we would go to Bahamas for a week, and then when I come back, I'd start to work. So we went to Bahamas, and we got to Bahamas, and for some reason the weather was it wasn't the best of weather at the time. So we left there. We stayed there one night, and we left there and went on to Jamaica. And when we got to Jamaica, it was around 87 degrees, real nice. And while we were there, we both stayed on the beach so much, we just got burned up. Our skin looked terrible. And when I came back in on Monday morning to go to work for this dealer, and I walked in the office, and I noticed everybody looking and looking. So finally one of them got up nerve enough. She said, well, where have you been? I said, I just came back from Jamaica. Oh, no wonder. So we were looking because we didn't know what was wrong, because my skin was all peeled off, and some of them said they'd never seen a black person peeled before.
And they probably had not.
So they saw that we can feel too.
Good,
As
good.
black people.
That's right, a good lesson in some cultural history there.
That's right. So anyway, then I worked for the Cadillac dealer for about, well, up until from 1970 to 1985. And then...
and in sales at that time?
Yes, in sales.
And at the time that you worked in sales, you did say that there was an issue as far as hiring blacks to work at sales. What about with the Cadillac dealership when you were working there at that time?
With the Cadillac dealership, it was just wide open. They didn't care if you were what you were, if you could produce. You know, that's what they wanted.
So that dealership didn't practice the discrimination that others were doing.
But I'll go back a little bit. Something I forgot. When I worked for the Buick dealer, when I first started working for them in sales, each year when the new models would come out, they have what they call the General Motors building in Detroit. And they would have all of the GM cars on the floor at this GM building. So my boss, who I had just started to work for, he thought it would be nice to send me. They had to send the salesman from each dealer, I'll put it that way. And he thought, since I had just started with them, it was a good idea to send me down to the General Motors building. So I went down. And I was working the floor, and I was working like, I think from 11 to 4 or 5, no, 11 to 8, that's the way it was. I was working till 8 o'clock that night. So around 4 or 4:30, when people started getting off from work at the General Motors building, and they coming through, and they saw me on the floor working. And I noticed they would look and look and look. And I didn't know what was wrong, so I called this, there was an elderly black fellow worked there. He'd been working there for years. So I called him over to ask him, I said, take a look at me and see if there's something wrong. So he took his glasses and he pulled them down his nose, and he looked me up and down. And then he said to me, he said, son, you don't know what's happening. I said, what? He said, you are the first, at that time they used colored, you know. He said, you're the first colored person that's ever worked on this floor. And I said, is that right? And he said, yes.
And what year was that?
That was in 1952.
Okay.
1952. So, in the meantime, a little later on, there was people from the press had got the news, and they came by, and they had the cameras taking pictures and all of that, and I didn't realize that there'd never been a black salesman on the floor there, although there wasn't too many blacks selling Cadillacs at the time, I mean Buicks at the time. So they got my picture and they put a big write-up in the paper and all of that. But in the meantime, while I was working the floor, evidently there was a rough place on one of the cars and I cut one of my fingers. So the security guard told this elderly black man to take me to the first aid. So he took me to the first aid and showed me where it was, and I went in and I told the lady that I had cut my finger on the floor, and she said, well, this is only for people that's working here. And I said, well, I'm working here. And she said, where are you working? I said, out on the floor. Well, she looked kind of funny, but she went ahead and banished my finger. Then when I came out and started back down where I was working, I just happened to turn around and look back, and she had came out of the office, and she was watching to see if I was telling the truth.
Huh.
So I went on back to work, and I worked, and then the next day, listen to this, the next day they had to send the salesman down again. In the meantime, the zone manager of Buick called the dealer where I was working and asked him why did he send me to the General Motors building to work. And he told him, he said, well, he's the authorized salesman here just like all the rest, and that's why I sent him. So I guess they kind of argued on the phone for a while. So the next day, my boss said, I'm sending you back down there again. So I went back the next day. And he told me, he said, I'm going to break this up. He said, that's not right. He said, you are authorized salesman and you're going to be treated like everybody else. I said, thank you. In the meantime, I had a friend working for another Buick dealer, and they wouldn't let him go to the General Motors building because he was black. And I called him and told him that I had worked, and I said, you should go down. He said, John, I'd like to go, but he said, they won't let me go. And I said, well, you should report him. But in the meantime, he didn't get a chance to go. But I found out that I was the first black to ever work on the General Motors floor for General Motors, which I couldn't believe myself because I didn't know that myself. Then, okay, I worked for the Cadillac, after I went to work for the Cadillac dealer, and I worked for them for 17 years, and I retired in 1985.
And when you retired, what position had you worked up to at that time?
I was still a salesman.
Okay.
I could have been an assistant manager, but I didn't want it. So.
And through that work, you got to meet people in various states across the U.S.
Oh yes, oh yes. As a matter of fact, in 1976, they had a contest, and whoever, at each Buick dealer, and this is all across the country, at each dealer, whatever salesman that sold the most Sevilles would win a trip to Jamaica. So my wife and I was on vacation. We were down in Louisville, Kentucky, and here in Covington. And when I got back, when we got back home, we were going on to Montreal, Canada, for a few days. So when I got back, my boss had been calling the house. He kept calling and calling until he got us. And he said, John, he said, I've been trying to reach you. And I said, what's up? He said, well, you won that, won the contest for selling the most Sevilles. I said, yeah. He said, I think it was that was like on Friday. And on Monday, he said, you and Ruby will be leaving, going to Jamaica. I said, oh, good. He said, I wanted to catch you before you left to go to Montreal. So we got ready and got the plane, and we were flown to Atlanta, Georgia. And there is where everybody, all the salesmen came in from all across the country, met, and we made up the group there to go to Jamaica. And we went to Jamaica, and of course we'd been there before quite a few times. But it was really an enjoyable trip because everything was free. Anything you wanted, all you had to do was just sign your name in Cadillac, or my wife could do the same thing, just sign Ruby and get whatever you wanted. And it was just real enjoyable. So that's the last time we went to Jamaica on this trip when we won. And as I said, I left Cadillac in 1985, and we had decided, she had retired, and we had decided that we were going someplace to live, but we hadn't quite decided where. And in the meantime, her sister, who lived at the time was living in Albuquerque, and she told us to come there and live. So we decided to come. So we stored all our furniture in Albuquerque, and decided that we'd go to Las Vegas and stay for 6 months, and then we'd come on back to Albuquerque and live. So that's what we did, and we're still in Albuquerque now. Living.
All right, and that's the trip from Kentucky to Michigan to New Mexico.
To New Mexico.
All right, well, I want to continue this segment, but I'm going to take a break for a moment, then we'll come back, and I want to hear a little bit about life on the farm and in the military.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we're back again with Mr. John Pennington, and this segment we're going to be talking about life on the farm.
Okay, Pam, I was born in, it was called Maywood, Kentucky. Maywood, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. And where is that?
That is the outskirts of Stanford, Kentucky. And my mother, her name was Margaret Pennington. My dad, his name was Clavin Allen, but he went by the name of Bud Pennington. And he had a 80-acre farm, and there was 12 children in all, 7 boys and 5 girls. And now there's only 3 of us left. There's 2 girls and myself, which makes 3. That's all that's left from the 12.
From the 12, and where are you in the number of 12?
I am the youngest one.
The youngest, okay.
Of the 12. And he had, as I was saying, he had this 80-acre farm. And my dad, he was a pretty smart man. Not that he had a education, but he was smart. And he would raise produce for the family. He would raise practically everything that we would eat. He would raise well, just all kind of vegetables he would raise, and he raised tobacco, which was the one of the big industries in Kentucky, and he raised all of these children, and I guess as they began to get older, they would leave and go to some other state, and they would all be scattered around different places. And I was the last one because I was the youngest. I was the last one to leave, and I left after I finished high school in 1939. I left there and went to Covington, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. Can we back up a little bit to the high school? Simply because the times then were a little bit different perhaps than now. In talking to my dad, he told me he did not encounter discrimination until he moved to Northern Kentucky. You graduated in the 30s. Did you have to go to a segregated school, or did you go with white children to school at that time?
No, at that time it was segregated in the school where I was going.
Okay.
Stanford High School. It was all black. It was all black school.
And as far as racism in your area, was it something that was very obvious, or was it something where, you know, on the farm it was a little bit different than city?
It was different. It was different, a little different from city. Although I don't remember having any problems. I mean, I got along with everybody, whether they were white or whatever. We all got along fine together. To give you an idea, one of our neighbors who finished school, his name was Robert Grimes. He was white. He finished school around the same year that I did, because we were around the same age. And for the high school prom, when I finished, we all wore white jackets. I think we had white jackets and maybe blue trousers, and yeah, and a dark blue shirt. dark blue shirts and white ties. That's what we wore to the prom. Men. I mean the boys, right? And this white fellow who was a friend of mine, he had finished around the time I did. He saw my outfit, and his prom was coming up, and he asked me if he could borrow my white jacket. And I told him, yes, you can borrow it. So he borrowed my white jacket and wore it to his prom. So you can see that we were kind of, you know. And then after I finished school in 1939, my brother-in-law was working here in Covington at the steel plant. And I told him to see if he could get me a job, and he said, well, I'll check and see, and I'll turn your name in. So he did. He turned my name in, and then he called and told me to come on up. So I came here to Covington, and I did get a job out at the steel plant. Okay, I went to work out there, and at the time you were working like, they called it chipping steel. And you had what they called air hammers that you would get to chip the steel. So I, one night, well, in the meantime, you worked in gangs, and you had a boss over every gang. So this white fellow that I worked for, he kind of, for some reason, he took up with me, and when he would take his night off, well, he told the night superintendent that he wanted me to take care of his gang for him, and I would. Every time he'd take off, I would take care of it. And the superintendent, the night superintendent, would notice the tonnage that I would be turning in the next morning. You had to turn in a tonnage sheet, and he told me, he said, you are doing a very good job. So finally, there was a job, one of those jobs coming up for bid. And the night superintendent, he came to me and he told me, now coming from him, you know, I believed it. He told me that I should put in for the job. So I did. And I told my brother-in-law, who was responsible for me getting the job, I told him that I was putting in for the job, and of course he thought, just like most of us thought at that time, that it was just losing time. But I went ahead and I put in for the job. So I came into work one evening, and I went in to the tool room where you go and order your hammer, this air hammer that you had to order out to chip steel. And the guy in there said to me, he said, when I walked up, he said, what are you going to do with it? I told him I wanted to order my hammer out, air hammer. He said, what are you going to do with it? And he carried on a lot of, you know, he liked to tease, you know. I said, what do you think I'm going to do with it? I'm going to chip steel. He said, well, you didn't look at the board out there when you came in, did you? And I said, no, I didn't look at it. He said, well, you better go take a look. Well, the first thing I thought, when he said take a look at the board, I thought maybe I had been laid off. But I went on out, and when I looked up at the board, there was my name, and I had got the job as inspector. So I went on back in, and I told, he said, you saw it, didn't you? And I said, yeah. He said, well, he said, you go on in the room in there and put your other clothes back on and get out of those clothes, because he said, you're not going to be working in those old greasy clothes anymore, just like that. So I went in and I changed, and I went on out on the yard where he chipped steel. And that particular night, the gang that I had, who I had been working with all the time, they for some reason they just wouldn't work.
Mm-mm. So after you got the promotion, they didn't want to work that night.
They didn't want to work for me. So
was this mainly?
I put up with them that night, and I came in the next night, and they worked a little bit better. But my tonnage started going down, and the night superintendent knew that I had been turning in good tonnage when I was filling in for this white inspector. So he came out on the floor one night. He said to me, he said, Pennington, he said, what's wrong? He said, your tonnage is really going down. He said, what's wrong? And I told him I didn't know, although I knew what was going on, but I didn't want to, really say what. He said, well, I think I know what's going on. He said, when you come in tomorrow night, he said, there'll be some changes made. Okay. Right away I thought, okay, he's going to take me off of this job and put me back on labor. So when I came in the next night, he had me with all white. I'm over all white gang.
Mm-hmm. Your previous gang, was it mixed?
No, the previous gang was all black.
Oh, okay.
So when I came in and he told me what he had done, and I'm thinking then, now, I don't know, it may be worse, That's what I'm thinking. But you know what? Those people worked hard for me. They looked like they tried to help me to regain the tonnage which I had been losing. Mm-hmm. And they really worked hard.
So were you the first black inspector, or just one of the first?
They had two more there, but they had been there for years,
Mm-hmm.
And by me being new and had just started there, that's why my brother-in-law thought I didn't have a chance, and he laughed when I told him that I had put in for it, and he said, you ain't gonna get it, just like that. Well, then when I did get it, even my brother-in-law, Mac Hayes, even my brother-in-law, he got jealous too, because see, he had been there quite a while too, and he had never gotten anything like that. But the main thing is, if you don't ask for something, you're not going to get it.
Right.
And some of them had never even thought about even putting in for a job like that, because they had the idea that they wouldn't get it, so they didn't put in for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I got it, and I worked that job until I was called in service in 1943, and that's when I went in the Army, and I was in the States about 6 months, and then I was sent to Italy, and I was in Italy for 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm. Which war was that at that time?
That was World War II. And I went in June of 1943.
Mm-hmm. And the units were still segregated at that time?
The what?
The units were still segregated?
Yeah, they were segregated at that time in service, yes. They were, because when I took my basic training in St. Louis, Missouri, it was called Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and we got, there was a group of, I think it was a group of 17 of us was leaving going to Florida. They were sending us to Eglinfield, Florida. And they always had to have one guy had to be in charge. And they made me in charge of the group. They gave me the orders, and they gave me money to buy food or whatever we wanted. And it was really strange. They wouldn't let us go back through the cars where the whites were to the dining car. They got to Alabama, they stopped the train and made us get off and walk back to the dining car to keep us from going through the car where the whites were.
So they were very strict with following and keeping that segregated practice going.
Yes. So then when we got to Florida, there's a place called well, where we were going, the airfield was called England Field, Florida, but this little town where the train stopped, and they were supposed to have trucks there to pick us up. But in the Army, you had to hurry, we called it hurry up and wait. You'd always have to wait. The trucks wasn't there when we got there to this little station. And the guys all said they would like to have a sandwich, and they was arrested right there. So I gave them money and told them to go in and order some sandwiches, which we knew we couldn't eat in there, but we just wanted to buy them to take out. So they went in, and pretty soon they came out and said they won't serve us in there. I said, I know they won't serve you in there. I said, I told you to get sandwiches to bring out. He said, that's what I mean. They won't serve us sandwiches to take out. I said, you mean that is true? And they said, yes. So I went back in with them, and I told the guy, I said, look, you won't, well, actually there was a girl, and the guy was back in, I guess he was the short of the cook. He was back in the kitchen part, but he was listening. I told her, I said, look, I said, you mean to tell me that you can't serve us some sandwiches to take out? And she said, no, we can't. We can't serve you no sandwiches to take out. I said, and here we are in the Army fighting for you, and we can't even get some sandwiches to take out. And I kind of told him off real good, and this guy, he came out from the kitchen, and he was listening to the conversation. And he said, the best thing for you guys to do is get out of here. And I said, we'll get out when we get ready. But anyway, we went on out. They wouldn't serve us. So after we served time there in Florida at this field, then we were getting ready to go overseas. From there, we were going to Virginia to go overseas. So the day we all got loaded up, our trucks and everything, to go to Virginia to go overseas, we had our convoy all lined up, and lined up because we leaving there, going to Virginia, where we would be leaving to go overseas. So in the meantime, that night, before we left, some of the guys broke into the supply and stole a lot of live ammunition. And we had what we called M1s and carbine rifles. So they had ammunition for all of these rifles and issued it out to us. So we decided when we go through this little town where they wouldn't serve us, we wasn't going to shoot to hit anyone. We were going to shoot in the air. But we didn't want to hurt anyone. But one of the guys, he got trigger happy before we left the camp. We all lined up and on the trucks, and he started firing his gun. And in the back, what they call a command car, that's where the officers were. And one of the officers, he got out his command car and he come walking down the line, and he said, all I want to know is who that is, who that was fired their gun. They are going to the guardhouse. Nobody said anything. So he turned around and started back to his command car. And when he started back, it sounded like war was going on because everybody was shooting the gun. So he got in his command car and he shut up. So when we started through this little town, all of these people come running out of their stores and houses, and they hollering, goodbye niggers, goodbye niggers. And we started firing. And they started running, and you'd see them lying down on the streets. They thought we were shooting at them, you know, but we were shooting in the air. We wasn't going to hit nobody. But anyway, I think we kind of taught them a lesson when we left there. We let them know that we had power, you know. And so anyway, we went on then to the train and went on to Virginia, and then we left from there and to go overseas, and we were on the water. Well, in the meantime, when we got on the ship, There was about, altogether, it's about 300 ships. Because every time we get to a certain point, we pick up some more. And there's about 300. And the ship we were on was out in the center of the convoy.
You recall the name of your ship?
I can't think of the name of it, but it was a Liberty ship. And we didn't know, we didn't know what was on the ship. We thought it was just the soldiers, So they would all, we were on the water for 31 days going over, because you'd be traveling maybe north, and they'd get a signal to change course and go a different way, and it's just zigzag all the way, dodging enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So something happened. They blew the whistle to change course, and one of the ships didn't really get the signal like he should. Anyway, to make a long story short, he almost hit the ship that we were on. That ship almost hit our ship. And one of our officers, it scared him so he had a heart attack.
Oh.
Well, it was a reason for him having a heart attack after we found out what was going on. They had our ship loaded with TNT, very explosive.
Mm.
And if those two ships had touched, it would have just blew up the whole ship, and, well, it would blew up both ships. The one that almost hit us, and it blew up our ship too. So that's when we found out that we were riding on TNT.
Mm.
Okay, well, we made it to Italy, and we got off the ship that night, and they put us in a university there. In the meantime, that night, the Germans had an air raid, came over, and they were dropping bombs, trying to blow up the ship there. And we all had to go in air raid shelters, but we made it, and then we left there and went on to another town in southern Italy, and we were stationed there for a while, and then they moved us to another station. And in the meantime, we finally got settled, and we were servicing airfields for B-24s, B-24 airplanes. That's what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. And what does that require when you say servicing a field? Okay, what kind of work was that?
We were making landing strips for this. We had a group of B-24s was coming from the States, and we had to have the landing strips ready for them by the time that they would get there, Mm-hmm. And we got them finished about a day before they were to come in.
You did.
They had what they call landing mats.
Mm-hmm.
It's steel mats, and what you do, we had graders, and they would grade off the strip, and then you put these steel landing mats down on the strip for the planes to come in and land on.
Okay.
That's what our outfit did.
Now I've only
meantime,
seen
my company commander. For some reason, I guess he'd say he liked me for some reason, and he made me something special. He had me to, whenever they needed something in the company, we had what we call the headquarters of our company, which was about a couple hundred miles from where we were. Naples, Italy, that's where it was. And when we needed something, he'd send me there to get whatever we needed. And it got to where I was known when I would go there, and I could get things for us that they wouldn't even have on the list, things that we needed, and have them to ship back to the company. So that's what I was doing. I was doing a special job. So when it came time to get out of the Army, Well, in the meantime, well, we were supposed to go to South Pacific. When the war ended there, we were supposed to go to South Pacific. And we got everything all packed and got it on the ship, and the advance party left, going on to South Pacific. But while they were on their way, before we got ready to leave, the war ended.
Okay, so how many years then was that?
How many years?
Yes.
That was about 3.
3 years' time.
3 years' time.
Okay.
And the advance party was headed for Japan, but it ended. So they said, "Well, you'll be getting out. We'll be going to the States." So everybody got happy because they thought we were leaving for the States. Then another order came out and said, "No, no one would be leaving. You'd only get out on points. You'd have to stay and get out on points." Okay, so we had to stay. And then when I had enough points to get out, well, my company commander, he came to me and he told me, he said, "Why don't you just stay?" He said, "We got a big promotion for you coming up." He said, "You should stay." And I said, "No, I think I want to go home." "You're not going to find it like it was when you left." And I said, "Well, I really want to go home because my mother is sick, and I want to go home." So he said, "Well," he said, "I tell you what I had in mind." He said, "I was going to recommend you for warrant officer." And I said, "Well, I just can't say I gotta go." And he said, "Well, okay, if you gotta go, you gotta go." So I came on back home, and after I came home, my mother was sick. And she died, I guess, probably about a couple of years after I came out of service. My mother, she passed. And that was the end of my Army career.
And you spent a total of how many years in the Army?
3.5 years.
3.5 years.
But the majority of the time was overseas. I only spent about 6 months in the States.
Now, at the time you served, because I have to get my history correct,
Okay.
World War II, was that the Tuskegee Airmen? Is that when they flew?
Yes,
Did you have a chance to meet any of these famous airmen?
Yes, let me tell you this. One night, me and another soldier, we went over to the base because a lot of times we'd go over on the air base to their bar because they had a big bar. And it wasn't segregated at the bar. So we'd go over there some nights and have a drink or something. And we were sitting at the bar, and these pilots, there were some pilots sitting at the bar too. They were white. They were B-24 pilots. So they were talking about the day, that day they went on this mission, and 2 German fighter planes, they saw them coming, and they started calling for escorts. And he said they called for escorts, and nothing happened, nothing happened. He said, looked like those planes were going to get them. And he said, all of a sudden, he said, a voice came out, said, "Don't worry about a thing, boss, we got you covered." And it was that black fighter group. And he said, pretty soon, both of those fighter planes, he saw them doing one of these things, going down. And he was telling us, he said, "You know what?" He said, that was some, they used the word "your boys," you know. He said, that was some of your boys. He said, they are really good. He said, we call on them a lot of times for escorts, and he said, he said, they are really good. He said, they took those 2 German planes right down, and he said, we thought they were going to get us. So a lot of people in the States, even today, really don't know how great the 99th and 99th and I think it was 101st. They don't know how good those people were, but they were great. That 99th Squadron of fighter planes, they were great.
Right. It's unfortunate that it took this long, you know, in history to find out their greatness and for them to get their awards and honors.
Yes.
While at least some of them are still living.
That's right. That's right. As a matter of fact, our one of the ex-mayors in Detroit, Mayor Coleman Young, he was one of them too.
Oh.
He was one of the fighter pilots.
Mm-hmm. I had the opportunity to meet some of them when they had them here in Cincinnati at the Convention Center, because I believe one of them lives in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, Colonel Davis.
Chappie Davis or what?
Colonel Davis was the commanding officer. Yeah, he was commanding officer. And they said, they had said that a fighter plane wouldn't glide. They said those planes won't glide. But Colonel Davis, he tried and he glided one in.
So that was something.
He was smart. He was a smart man.
Mm-hmm. Now you said over there, the clubs or whatever for the military were not segregated. That was different, right? That was different than here in the States.
Oh, definitely, definitely. When you got over there, well, to give you an idea, I was in a restaurant one day and sitting there eating, and the waitress, this Italian girl, she came over to the table where I was sitting, and I was sitting there, and actually, you know, tears were coming down my eyes, and she asked me what was the matter. She asked me in Italian. At the time I could speak some Italian, you know, and I told her nothing. What it was, I was thinking about the time we were in Alabama, and they wouldn't serve us sandwiches to take out, and I'm here in the States, and I'm overseas now, in a different country, and they were serving it, but I couldn't get served in the States where I was born. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that, and that's what was the reason why.
Mm-hmm. As a result of that, a lot of the blacks in the military at that time, when they fought in Italy, they never came back to the States.
Right. A lot of them stayed, you know, they stayed in the States because...
Or in Europe.
I mean, in Europe, I meant to say, because they didn't want to come back to the States the way they were treated.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And you couldn't blame them. For, that's the way it was. Mm-hmm. Now there was the 92nd Division, the Buffalo Soldiers. They took over a town in Italy.
Now there were some called Buffalo soldiers then too.
Yeah, they took over a town in Italy, and one of your relatives, Jim Jennings, he was in the 92nd Division.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Johnny Jennings, he was in my outfit, the same outfit I was in.
Oh, so you knew them then.
Johnny and I went from our camp to, he went with me to take a lieutenant up to a place called Leghorn, Italy. And that was up near the front line. We took an officer up there. And on the way back, we had so many days to make this trip, and on the way back, Johnny and I, we stopped at the camp where Jim Jennings was. We stopped there. And they had taken over this little town. It was called Via Regia, Italy. And see, the white soldiers, they didn't allow the black soldiers to come around their camps. Okay, once they took over this little town, this Via Regia, then some of them wanted to come in to that town, but they didn't allow them. They didn't allow them in there. I mean, it was only the 92nd Division controlled everything, and it made you think about. Like in the States, we got in the Jeep that night, and Jim Jennings was taking us around the shores, and we'd drive down the street to this corner, and here's a little joint here. They'd be in there dancing and all of that, and then we'd leave there and go on around 2 or 3 streets more, and you'd find another joint. it made you feel like you were in the States, you know, in some of our joints, you know. It was really great.
So life in the military, as far as for a black, wasn't really all that pleasant, but you were there doing a job for your country, and that sense of...
No, it wasn't pleasant at all, but you were doing a job. You were doing a job for your country. Just like in Florida, at Egan Field, we were there up on the base. They had a great big service area there, you know, a restaurant and everything. But the blacks wasn't allowed to go in there. It was only for the white soldiers, you know. We had our own little service club down where we were, you know, just segregated. But we made it through, and I was happy to get back alive and in good health. And I didn't get shot up or anything, although our company, we received a Purple Heart for something that we did when we were in Italy. So it was, I really was happy over the experience of just being in service, you know, and seeing what's going on and whatnot. I was happy that I did go.
And we were very fortunate to have men like you in the military representing our country, and particularly the proudness of the black race through the history and ages.
Right.
And I thank you so much for taking the time to share a bit of this history with
Pam,
me.
I really thank you too. I really thank you for doing this.
Well, you're very welcome.